Hello everyone, thanks for watching TV Spoilers. Reveal that the undercurrent between Diane and Nikki doesn't arrive like a sudden explosion that burns out quickly. It's more like an old fracture inside a wall everyone kept insisting was solid quiet for years. Then loud the moment the air turns cold enough for the crack to spread. What viewers are watching isn't just another familiar sparring match between two women who have spent too much of their lives on opposite sides. It's a chain reaction triggered by a question that has always haunted Genoa City and never truly found an answer. What, exactly, is Jack protecting, and who is he willing to hurt in order to protect it? Diane sees that question take shape in the way Jack defends Nikki, not once as a courtesy, but with a kind of loyalty so instinctive it makes Diane feel as if she's being forced to swallow the bitterest thing of all. The expectation that she must understand, must be gracious, must rise above, while her own dignity is stretched to the point of snapping. What ignites Diane isn't that she doesn't understand who Nikki is or what Nikki has survived. It's that Diane understands too well. There are women who never escape the prisons they build out of the word family. And Nikki is one of them, always choosing to stay beside Victor, always clinging to the marriage as if it's the last thread keeping her from falling. She does it no matter how badly Victor treats Jack, no matter how ruthless he becomes, no matter how many times Jack is pulled into the Newman war and asked to pay for sins that aren't his. Diane isn't surprised that Nikki chooses Victor. Nikki has done it so many times that it's no longer a decision so much as a reflex. But that lack of surprise is what makes Diane's anger feel dangerous, because it's righteous anger. Accumulated, measured, stamped with memory. Nikki's loyalty is both tragic and toxic. It allows Victor to remain Victor, to keep controlling, to keep crushing others, while Nikki stands there polishing the family image like it's sacred, enough to excuse every bruise left behind. If the story were only Nikki, Diane could manage it with a cold smile and the knowledge that Newman loyalty always looks like that. But the thing that truly unravels Diane is Jack. Diane doesn't just see him protecting Nikki, she sees him doing it with a fierce inevitability. As if he can't help himself, as if something deep inside him rises whenever Nikki is cornered. Whenever Nikki is asked to choose, and Jack automatically steps forward to shield her. Diane understands the cruel irony. Nikki is the wife of Jack's worst enemy. A living symbol of the world that has stolen Jack's sleep, peace, and trust again and again. And yet Jack still defends her, still speaks of her as a friend who needs protecting, as a woman trying to hold on to what's left of herself. Diane sees in Jack a tenderness he cannot even explain. And that makes her not merely angry but afraid. Because what Jack cannot explain is also what Diane cannot measure. And what cannot be measured cannot be controlled. Diane has lived long enough to know that some loyalties begin as kindness and end as betrayal. Not because someone wanted to betray you, but because they kept placing another person's pain above yours without ever admitting it. Diane's fury at Jack isn't about wanting him to hate Nikki the way Victor hates Jack. It's about wanting Jack to see what Diane sees. Nikki chooses Victor, even after Victor has treated Jack brutally. And Jack's protection of Nikki turns Jack into the one who endures yet again. Diane feels as if she is watching the man she loves extend his wrist for the handcuffs, convinced that his sacrifice will spare someone else. Diane cannot understand why Jack accepts that role, why he stays loyal to Nikki like she's a sacred friend, when Nikki is still a pillar in the system that keeps injuring him. Diane's anger isn't simple jealousy, it's rage at watching Jack repeat a pattern of self-sacrifice. A pattern that keeps crowning him the good man in a story where the villain always wins. Diane has tried to rebuild her life from ruins to prove she has changed, to earn Jack's trust and his choice. And yet, in front of her, reality lands like a slap. The moment Nikki stands in the posture of someone who needs defending, Jack becomes the defender without hesitation. Diane cannot stand the feeling that she must watch Jack live out his rescue instinct, while she becomes the difficult woman, the one who asks questions, the one who is labeled too sensitive. The more Diane thinks, the more her throat tightens. Part of her understands why Nikki wants to preserve the marriage and keep the family intact, if she can. Nikki isn't clinging only to Victor, she's clinging to a history, a structure, an identity. Nikki may love Victor in a way outsiders will never understand. She may have endured what other women would have fled from long ago. And in Nikki's heart, leaving Victor might feel less like leaving a man and more like abandoning a life she has known for decades, abandoning promises, duties, and the terrifying comfort of what is familiar. Diane isn't naive enough to deny any of that. But Diane also knows something else. People often hide behind the phrase. For the family to cover their own fear, to legalize their weakness, to convince themselves that suffering is noble. The harder Nikki tries to keep the family, the more Victor is empowered to remain in control. And inside that circle, Jack becomes collateral damage, a price Nikki silently accepts. Diane cannot accept Jack being reduced to that price, and she cannot accept Jack volunteering to pay it. In Jack, Diane sees a contradiction that is both beautiful and cruel. Jack is the kind of man who cannot turn his back on someone who is falling, even when that person is technically on the other side. Even when that person has repeatedly chosen the man who hurts him. Jack protects Nikki as if there is a part of Nikki he cannot hate. A part that convinces him she isn't fully Newman, that she can still choose what is right, that she can still be a friend. And Jack loves Nikki for reasons he cannot explain, which drives Diane nearly mad because an unexplainable feeling is a feeling without boundaries. Diane doesn't fear Jack's cruelty. Diane fears Jack's kindness because it keeps dragging him into wars that are not his. And by the end of it, he is always the one bleeding. Diane fears that kindness will always place Nikki in a special position, no matter how hard Diane tries to build a line that protects their marriage. So the tension isn't simply between Diane and Nikki, it is inside Diane. She is angry at Nikki in a way that feels familiar, almost predictable. Like being angry at winter rain, miserable but not shocking. She is angry at Jack in a way that hurts more because he is the man she wants to trust. The man she wants to build stability with, the stability she has chased her whole life. Diane feels pulled between two doors. One is acceptance, accepting Jack as he is, with his wide loyalty and his soft heart. The other is self-protection, refusing to let anyone, including Nikki, step into the private space Diane is trying to keep intact. Diane is caught between her desire to be the woman who is mature, understanding, above old grudges, and her fear that this so-called understanding will turn her into someone who always yields, always swallows her pain, always stays silent to preserve peace. Diane knows the feeling of being dismissed as jealous, unreasonable, dramatic. She hates it, but she hates even more the idea of pretending she is fine while her heart is screaming. Diane is sick of Nikki, not because Nikki is doing something new, but because Nikki represents a loop Diane wants Jack to escape. Nikki stands with Victor even when Victor treats Jack badly. And Nikki always has explanations that sound reasonable enough to make blame difficult. Marriage, family, something bigger than the moment. That very reasonableness traps Diane, because it makes Nikki hard to accuse while the damage still lands on other people. Diane sees Jack understand that damage and still defend Nikki. And Diane starts asking herself what Jack is really searching for, and Nick hired redemption for an old war, or proof that he can still pull someone back from Victor's darkness. Diane doesn't know, and not knowing becomes its own kind of poison. She feels as if she's staring at a map with a corner torn off, trying to guess which roads lead to pain. The tension doesn't need screaming to be suffocating. It lives in the way Diane looks at Jack and feels distance grow even when they're close. It lives in the way she looks at Nikki and can't decide whether Nikki is an enemy or a woman to pity. It lives in the way Jack tries to hold everything steady with goodness, only for the cracks to become more visible the harder he tries. Diane knows she's facing a problem with no graceful solution. Either she accepts that Nikki will always exist in Jack's world because Jack cannot fully turn away from her, or Diane lets this anger keep expanding until it becomes suspicion, then coldness, then collapse. Diane also knows that if she stays silent, she will become the woman she once hated, the woman who endures to preserve an image, who keeps telling herself to understand while her heart begs to be saved. And then, in the thick of that tension, Diane realizes what frightens her most isn't Nikki choosing Victor, and it isn't Jack defending Nikki. It's the possibility that Jack can keep doing it forever, no matter how much Diane hurts. Diane stops being surprised. She starts going cold. She understands the real war isn't about who Nikki chooses, but about where Jack chooses to place Diane in the hierarchy of his loyalties. Diane begins to see everything through a sharper lens. If Jack can be loyal to Nikki as a friend, even though Nikki is married to his worst enemy, then Jack's loyalty is not Diane's privilege, it is Jack's nature, his instinct. Something any woman can touch if she appears wounded enough in Jack's eyes. And if that is true, Diane has to ask herself the question she has been avoiding. Is she in love with a man who will always rescue other people first? Or is she in love with the illusion that this time Jack will rescue her first? Diane understands that if she doesn't find a way to name what is happening between Jack and Nikki, she will keep losing to something Jack cannot explain. And Jack's calm certainty when he defends Nikki suddenly feels like the first sign of a deeper truth. Under that loyalty, one that, once dragged into the light, will force Diane to choose between trusting Jack one last time or leaving the game before it grinds her into nothing. Based on recent Y&R developments and spoilers, Nikki is quietly teaming up with Michael. The AI program talk is more surface level, and Matt Clark's disappearance is the urgent spur Nikki fears Victor might kill Matt, instead of turning him over to the police, so she pushes Michael to intervene. In Genoa City, tragedy doesn't always begin with an explosion. Sometimes it begins with a silence that lasts just a little too long enough for you to realize something is being hidden. Nikki steps into that kind of silence with a familiar, suffocating pressure. The kind that comes from living too long in Victor's shadow, where every choice is sweetened with the word family. But underneath is the blade of power. She knows Victor better than almost anyone. She knows how he can turn loyalty into a noose, and protection into a socially acceptable excuse for control. And because she knows him, she cannot pretend she's calm while everything starts slipping off its axis. People may mention the artificial intelligence program as a situation, another item on the endless list of battles Victor treats like strategic games, but for Nikki, it is nothing more than fog-thin cover for the real storm. What keeps her awake isn't a tech plan or an invisible power struggle. It's the name Matt Clark, vanishing like a shadow swallowed by the night, and the urgent, icy instinct that follows if Matt falls into Victor's reach. No police officer will ever get to him in time, and no justice will arrive soon enough to stop Victor from acting first. Nikki doesn't need proof to be afraid. She only needs memory. And in this marriage, memory has always been more reliable than promises. Nikki once believed she could slow Victor down with love, with shared history, with the years they survived together. But the older she gets, the clearer it becomes that Victor doesn't stop for anyone, it only changes the shape of his advance. So fewer people can see it. Matt Clark's disappearance forces Nikki to look at everything through the eyes of someone who has lived beside a predator when prey goes missing. The scariest possibility isn't that it escaped, but that someone has already hidden it. Nikki knows a truth she has never dared to say out loud under her own roof. Victor might view turning Matt over to the police as weakness, as surrender, as allowing someone else to decide the fate of a man who has thrown the family into chaos. And Victor does not like anyone else deciding anything for him. The thought that Victor might choose to permanently silence Matt, instead of letting the legal system touch him, sends a cold shiver through Nikki. It isn't only terrifying because it would be cruel. It is terrifying because it would be logical for Victor, consistent with the distorted justice he always claims to serve, eliminate the problem at the root, erase the threat before it grows beyond his control. Nikki does not want to believe her husband is capable of that. Yet the life she has lived beside him tells her she has no right to be naive. At that point, Nikki understands that if she stays still, she becomes an accomplice to silence. And silence in the Newman world has never been harmless. It is simply an expensive coat thrown over decisions that make people disappear. Nikki is not unfamiliar with guilt, but this time the guilt arrives from the future. From a scene that hasn't happened yet but feels vivid enough to taste, Matt Clark vanishes. And later someone finds him in a condition that can't speak his story. Genoa City exhales, accepts it, forgets it. Because that is how people learn to survive around Victor Newman. Nikki cannot bear that outcome. That is why she does the thing she has avoided for too long. She turns to Michael as an off-grid exit, an intervention outside Victor's orbit. A gray zone Nikki both despises and needs. Nikki knows Michael can understand how Victor operates in a way that moral purity refuses to admit. Michael has served Victor, bowed to him. But he is smart enough to recognize the moment he is being pulled toward a cliff. Nikki doesn't choose Michael because she trusts him completely. She chooses him because he is practical enough to act before it's too late. This handshake between Nikki and Michael doesn't feel clean or heroic. It feels like a shadow agreement between two people who know they are stepping past a line. Nikki can see the manipulation inside her own choice. She is using strategy against strategy, secrecy to block secrecy, deception to stop a potential atrocity. And the most frightening part is that she no longer sees another option. If she wants to pull Victor back from a point of no return, she has to play on Victor's board. She cannot stand outside it and beg. Nikki hates the sensation that she must resemble Victor in certain ways to fight Victor. Hates the thought that protecting her family is turning her into the kind of person who traps her family in a deadlock. But sometimes a deadlock is the only thing that stops Victor from moving forward on pure momentum. Nikki knows that if she and Michael do this correctly, they can force a position that Victor can't easily manage, not through direct strength, but through a counterstrike that makes Victor calculate, hesitate, and fear that a single wrong step could cost him what he values most. Nikki's realization is bitter. Victor is rarely restrained by morality. He is restrained by risk. But to create risk big enough, Nikki has to make Matt Clark's disappearance the urgent crisis that cannot be distracted by anything else. People can discuss the AI program, its implications, the politics, the leverage. The chess moves different factions might attempt. To Nikki, all of that becomes a luxury the moment Matt disappears from reach. The AI story may carve up the future. Matt's disappearance can slice the present in half. Nikki sees the difference the way you see two knives, one that dissects tomorrow, and one that cuts today. She chooses today because if today is cut beyond repair, there is no tomorrow left to fight over. That is why Nikki pushes Michael to intervene, and not by talking Victor down, not by appealing to his conscience, but by acting in a way that prevents Victor from getting to Matt first. Or at least blocks Victor from handling Matt the way he always handles problems, quietly, completely, and without witnesses. Nikki doesn't romanticize Michael's motives. She knows he has reasons, keeping balance, keeping his position, keeping himself safe in a city where Victor rewards and punishes like a king. Yet Nikki senses something in Michael that mirrors her own dread, the fear that Victor might do something irreversible and drag everyone into a moral swamp no one can wash away. Nikki needs Michael not because she wants affection or loyalty. She needs him because he knows channels Nikki can't touch. Because he can speak to systems without letting them realize they're being steered. She needs him because he can turn her panic into strategy, her emotion into leverage. And that transformation leaves Nikki both relieved and horrified. Relieved because she is not alone. Horrified because she is stepping deeper into the darkness Victor has used his entire life. From the moment Nikki accepts this secret partnership, she also accepts another truth. She is challenging the highest authority inside her own marriage. Nikki knows Victor will not forgive betrayal, even if it is wrapped in a humanitarian reason. To Victor, betrayal is still betrayal. And the most dangerous betrayal is the kind that comes from the person he believes belongs to him. Nikki understands that her marriage has long survived on an unspoken agreement. She may disagree. She may cry, she may rage, but in the end she must stand with Victor when the world is watching. This time, Nikki breaks that agreement by acting behind his back. She asks herself how far she has fallen, who she has become, when the survival of a man like Matt Clark becomes the reason she is willing to put a knife to her own household. But the moment that thought makes her shake, another thought forces her spine straight. If she doesn't do this, who will? If she doesn't stop it, who will stop it? And if she closes her eyes, how will she live with herself when it's over? Nikki begins to look at Victor differently, not as a wife trying to preserve a family, but as a woman calculating how dangerous a man becomes when he is cornered and determined to protect power. She remembers how he can make someone disappear from a life and still wear a calm face, as if no blood ever touched him. Nikki has spent years telling herself Victor was simply strong, simply hard, simply uncompromising. That it was the price of leadership, the price of protecting the Newman name. Matt's disappearance refuses to let her lie to herself again. If Victor truly intends to kill Matt to erase the chaos, then this is no longer a story about strength. It becomes a story about the last moral boundary being erased. Nikki does not want to stand beside Victor when that line vanishes. She does not want her legacy to be that of a woman who saw everything and stayed silent. Yet Nikki recognizes the cruel paradox because she fears Victor might kill Matt. She must act faster, use sharper tactics, keep deeper secrets. And the deeper the secrecy, the more she resembles Victor. Nikki hates that resemblance. It clings like a shadow, reminding her that when you live in the Newman world long enough, you learn to survive on the very poison you once despised. Nikki grabs onto one thing to keep herself from slipping fully into that abyss: purpose. Her purpose is not to destroy Victor, not to break the family, not to seize power. Her purpose is to prevent a crime before it happens, to stop a brutal decision before it becomes a permanent stain on Newman history. She clings to that purpose like a lifeline, while still knowing the line could snap the moment Victor senses betrayal. The pressure intensifies not because of what Nikki and Michael are planning, but because time itself begins to feel smaller. Matt Clark's disappearance is not a problem that can wait until tomorrow. Every minute, Nikki imagines a different outcome. Victor finds Matt first. Matt is taken somewhere unreachable. Matt is erased from the map as if he never existed. Nikki feels like she is running down a dark corridor, and the shadow behind her is Victor. She doesn't want to turn Victor into a monster in her mind, but her mind keeps painting the picture because it fits too well with the power he holds. Nikki's insistence that Michael intervene is not only rational, it is controlled desperation. Desperation she cannot reveal openly because revealing it would be the same as admitting she is fighting her husband. As Nikki commits to this alliance, she realizes a deeper contradiction. She is trying to save Victor from Victor. Because if Victor kills Matt, it won't only be the death of one man. It will be the end of the last illusion that Victor can still turn back for love. Nikki knows that once Victor crosses that line, his cruelty becomes unlimited. Because he will learn the most dangerous lesson of all: he can do anything and still survive. Still be feared. Still be obeyed. Nikki does not want to remain married to that version of Victor. Even more, she doesn't want to become the woman who proves he is right by staying. That is why Nikki's counterattack with Michael is not a power grab. It is a battle for boundaries, a desperate attempt to draw a red line Victor cannot cross. But Nikki also knows Victor is not easily blocked. If Victor feels trapped, he will force an exit, and his exits are rarely gentle. Nikki is caught in the double edge of her own goal. She wants to corner Victor into a deadlock, where he cannot move, but she fears that deadlock might trigger a more vicious strike. She feels as if she is holding a tightrope between two buildings with a drop beneath her, and a single tremor could send everything down. Nikki understands that what she and Michael are doing might save a life, but it could also drag the entire Newman dynasty into a crisis where no one can keep their masks on. She asks herself whether she has the courage to go all the way, or whether she will do what she has done before, soften at the final second to preserve the family, then live with regret afterward. Nikki refuses to live with regret. That refusal awakens the most ruthless version of her, the version she buried years ago, so she could survive as Victor's wife. She accepts that in this fight she cannot afford softness, not because she wants to win, but because she wants to prevent an ending that cannot be undone. And as Nikki hardens, she feels a slow grief underneath, grief that she must fight the man she once loved. Grief that she must take detours. Grief that her marriage has reached a point where truth must be spoken through secrecy. She doesn't blame anyone else because she knows this is the cost of staying beside Victor. But understanding the cost doesn't make it hurt less. It only makes it hurt in a deeper, quieter way without any place to release it. When night falls, Nikki's thoughts return to one point: where is Matt Clark? And where is Victor in that story? She tries to cling to the possibility that her fear is unfounded. That Victor, however ruthless, will ultimately hand Matt to the police to avoid complications. But Nikki cannot fool herself anymore. She has watched Victor solve problems too many times in ways the outside world never learns. And that fear becomes a wordless demand inside her. Michael must help her intervene. Must help her erect a barrier before Victor reaches Matt. Because once Victor reaches him, the story will end in silence, the kind of silence Nikki will carry in her chest for the rest of her life. The hook doesn't come from a new action, but from what Nikki suddenly realizes: this secret alliance only works if Victor never suspects it. And while she is pouring all her focus into saving Matt from Victor, she has forgotten the most terrifying truth about Victor: Newman senses betrayal before it has a face. And if Victor catches even the faintest scent of Nikki standing with Michael in the dark, the question won't be what happens to Matt next, but what Victor does to Nikki when he decides to reclaim absolute control. On our TV Spoilers channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.